Strange but true stories. Tales from the light side, the dark side, and the other side. I'm Steve White. We've all been in a situation that we didn't want to be in, or a place where we didn't feel comfortable and would do just about anything to be anywhere else. Heck, most of us feel like that in our day jobs, right? But yet, we trudge on, finding a way to make it through eventually, getting to the other side of that experience with knowledge of how to avoid it in the future. But what if that knowledge of how you wound up on the other side of that situation wasn't there? A snap of the finger moment where minutes or hours have passed without you having any knowledge of it. That would be wild, wouldn't it? The following stories tell of situations just like that. People that, for no better explanation, find themselves in a different place or time. 1. Dimension shift in Tacoma. It was April 1976. I was in the U.S. Army stationed at Fort Lewis in Washington State. One evening, I was in downtown Tacoma. I was on my way to meet a friend to grab a few beers. We were supposed to meet at 9, and for whatever reason, I wasn't wearing my watch. I wondered if I had time to go take care of something else before meeting him, so I looked around for the nearest store where I could find out the time. Across the street, there was a movie theater. I figured that was as good a place as any. I started to cross the street, and then something weird happened. My vision blurred, and I felt really strange. And then the next thing I knew, my vision was clearing up and I was standing in front of the counter inside the theater lobby. I had a ferocious headache and my legs felt very unsteady. I recovered a little, but that headache was like none I had ever experienced before or since. It doubled me over and I started rubbing my forehead. After a few moments, I heard a gasp. I looked up and there was this young lady on the other side of the counter with a surprised look on her face. She asked me how I got in. With the throbbing pain in my head, I looked at her, but didn't know how to answer her. I was confused. I started to walk toward the counter and she backed away. Now she looked scared. I must have looked crazed with the pained look on my face. She asked me again how I got in. It was then that I looked up at the wall behind her. There was a clock hanging there. That clock couldn't be right, could it? I managed to mutter, "What time is it?" She then told me I had better leave or she was going to call the police. I felt so weird. It's hard to explain. I felt like I had broken through into a territory I didn't recognize. I stood there for a little while longer, trying to get a handle on what had just happened. I mean, a moment ago, I was outside. Now, I'm inside, and the clock says it's what time? That's when the girl went into the back room. I could hear her talking to someone. I turned around and started to walk toward the entrance, and that's when this big guy came out of the back room, walked around the counter, and before I could say anything, he grabbed me by the arm, pulled me toward the door, unlocked it, and shoved me outside. He told me to move along, and he went back inside. I still couldn't figure out what was going on. I stood there looking around, rubbing my head. The time on the clock read 12:15. It was past midnight. What had happened to the last 3 hours? I looked back at the theater. It had the closed sign on the front door. The girl and the guy were still there staring at me. They must have thought I was drunk by the way I was staggering around dumbfounded. Then the big guy opened the door again and warned me that if I didn't leave that instant, he was going to kick my ass. So I started to walk away, still confused. And as I was walking, I heard the guy say, "I don't know how you got inside with the door being locked, but you better not come back." Yeah, I thought. I don't know how I got inside either. I guess none of us will ever truly know. 2. Horror House. I was living in Austintown, Ohio back in 1981. I was 20 at the time and looking for a place of my own. My dad asked me if I wanted to look at a house that was for rent the following morning. It was going to be an early start to the day, but I said that I would go with him. The next morning, around 5 a.m., we stopped by my grandmother's house for coffee. She was always an early riser and asked what we were doing up so early. Dad told her that we were meeting a realtor at 6. I thought it was kind of silly to meet somebody that early to look at a house. But hey, the early bird gets the worm, right? At 5:30, we left my grandmother's and arrived at the rental house a little before 6. As we pulled in the drive, we noticed the yard had not been cared for. The house was a rectangular 2-story dwelling with front windows only on the second floor. As we got out of the van, we heard kids laughing in the backyard. It seemed a little early for kids that sounded this young to be playing and making so much noise, but we figured it was the neighbor kids from across the street. We approached the back of the house, and there was a swing set with 2 swings. Those swings were swinging in opposite directions, with nobody on them. Once again, we heard laughter of a boy and a girl. We both looked around for where they might have run off to. When we looked back at the swing set, the swings were still. Dad asked if I had seen that. I had, but I couldn't figure. That was really weird. We let that go for a moment and proceeded to the side of the house. We passed the garage. It had 2 wooden doors with small glass panes. We looked in the window. The garage had a dirt floor and was completely empty. We walked up to the side porch. The door was unlocked, and even though the agent hadn't shown up yet, we didn't figure there would be any harm in checking inside. The former tenant's stuff had all been moved out, and it was just bare rooms and empty closets. So we opened the door and went in. Dad flipped the light switch, but no lights came on. I tried a few with no luck. That wasn't that weird, but the inside of the house sure was. It was a large room with doorways branching off of it. The living room was like none I had ever seen. It was about 10 by 40 with no windows except for the small one in the door. I went back to where Dad was. He was trying to open a door we assumed would lead to the basement, but it was locked. He asked me if I was ready to go, but before I could answer, he walked into the living room and stared out the window and the front door. He stood there for several minutes. I walked around a bit more, and then I was about to go upstairs when I started to get this really eerie feeling. So I stayed in the main area. Dad then came out and asked if I was ready to go again. At that point, Dad pointed to the door again that we believe led downstairs to the basement and said we hadn't tried that door. I looked at him strangely and told him he had tried it just a few minutes ago. He turned the knob, and this time, the door opened. That was weird. I had seen him try it. My dad's not one to joke around. This is the heart of steel and coal country, and he wasn't going to pretend a door was locked when it wasn't. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. Now, I was getting a little scared. Dad flipped the light switch, and the light came on. I was wondering why the other lights hadn't come on earlier. Dad proceeded to go down the steps. I was wary, but I went down the steps too. The basement was small. There was an old wringer washer, and on the lid of the washer was a gun. It looked like a kid's cap gun with an ivory handle. I picked it up, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw the light cord moving. Just then, the lights went out, and the basement door slammed shut. It was so dark, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. My dad and I found each other, and then following behind him, holding his shirt, we went up the stairs. When he got to the top of the stairs, he let out this blood-curdling scream. It made my blood run cold. I pushed him forward, and he pushed the door open. All the overhead lights in the house were on, and it was dark outside. We ran out of the house and jumped in the van. Why was it so dark? Dad cranked the car and turned the headlights on. The garage doors were now open, and on the dirt floor, we saw what appeared to be a lamb with its throat slashed. It was jerking violently. Blood was spurting out and running into the dirt. After what we had just experienced and what my dad had seen, there was no way we were getting out of the van to take a closer look. We peeled out of the driveway and headed home. We looked at the time. It was 2:30 a.m. We had lost 20 hours? We hadn't been in that house more than 10 minutes. The next afternoon, we drove past the house again. All the doors were shut and the lights were out. We supposed somebody, like the rental agent, could have done that. But when I asked Dad about what he had seen when he screamed, he clammed up and did not want to talk about it. To this day, I don't know what he saw, and at this point, I'm pretty sure I don't want to know. I went back in 1987 to see if the house was still there. It was all boarded up. There was a large sign on the house stating that, "For your own safety, keep out." 3. I teleported 20 miles. It was 1986. I was on my way home to Bayside, Queens. I was coming from White Plains, and the trip required me to travel the Hutchinson River Parkway, pay a 25-cent toll, and cross the Throgs Neck Bridge. The road before the entrance to the Hutchinson River Parkway was confusing. It was easy to miss the exit. I remember nervously looking at the 25 cents on the tray of my Volvo, wishing the toll would come sooner than it did so I could be on my way. That's when I missed the exit. Instead of going to the next exit and turning back to correct my mistake, yeah, I know, that would have been the right thing to do, I decided to back up on the highway and see if I could get the exit after all. I backed up with oncoming traffic behind me, swerving the car to the shoulder to make the exit amid beeping and skidding. But I attained the exit with no damage to anybody's car. Just as I reached the Hutchinson River Parkway, I heard the siren. It was a patrolman coming after me. Surely he witnessed my crazy driving maneuver. I was kicking myself over compounding my initial mistake with what was surely going to be another mistake, and this one was going to be costly. I pulled over and looked in the rearview mirror. The policeman that was getting out of the patrol car was the scariest officer I had ever seen. Never mind the boots and the hat and the sunglasses, he just looked completely mean. I looked down at my lap and said out loud, "Dear God, I'd rather be anywhere but here." I went to fish out my license and registration. When I looked back up, expecting to hand my information to the officer and put on my best smile, my car was now on the side of the entrance to the Throgs Neck Bridge, well beyond the Hutchinson River Parkway, which I hadn't driven yet. The 25-cent toll was still in the tray of my car. There was no patrolman or patrolman's car in my rear view. I felt weird, too. I felt stiff, as if I were thawing out from being frozen. So I flexed my wrists, rubbed my eyes, and looked again. I was still on the entrance to the bridge, 20 miles beyond the Hutchinson River Parkway. No policeman, no patrol car. In order for this to happen, my car and I would have had to have been lifted in the air, placed back down 20 miles up the road. I mean, I couldn't have thrown it in gear and sped away from the officer without remembering it. If I had tried that, I would have had the entire state police in hot pursuit after me. And I surely would have remembered that. I sat in my car for a long time in utter shock. There was no logical explanation to why I was here and not back there getting a ticket for my reckless driving. After I was able to calm my nerves enough to drive, I put the car in gear and drove slowly over the bridge. Just beyond the bridge was my neighborhood. I always wondered what the cop saw. Did another me get a ticket that day? Did I simply vanish in front of him? Did it just unhappen for him? That's one heck of a way to get out of a ticket. I just wish I knew how it happened, but I'm sure I will always be left to wonder what we both experienced that day. This has been Strange but True Stories. Have you ever experienced anything like any of these people did? If so, we would love to hear about it. Send us an email to strangebutTrueStories2@gmail.com. Leave us a comment below and tell us what you thought of these stories, and subscribe if you haven't already. I'm Steve White. Thanks for watching. Until next time.